Alex had always thought living in the quiet Oak Ridge Estates HOA was a safe bet, a peaceful neighborhood with manicured lawns, friendly neighbors, and clear rules everyone seemed to follow. But that morning, as the sun filtered through the curtains, an unexpected discovery shattered his calm. It was a thick envelope slid quietly beneath his front door. The stark white paper stood out against the warm oak flooring, the HOA's official emblem stamped in bold black ink on the front. Alex's name was handwritten neatly, but the message inside was anything but friendly. He tore it open with a creeping sense of unease. Inside, a letter spelled out an alarming demand, a $2,100 fine. The accusation was vague. Violation of HOA regulations pertaining to exterior alterations. Alex frowned. Exterior alterations. His house had looked the same for years. No new fences, no unapproved paint colors, nothing unusual. The letter made no mention of specific dates or photos. Instead, it threatened that failure to pay within 14 days would trigger escalating penalties, legal fees, and potential liens on his property. Alex's mind raced. Was this some kind of mistake? Or a cruel power play? He felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach as he reread the letter, the formal tone somehow feeling personal, accusatory. The HOA president, a man named Richard, was known for his strict enforcement and zero tolerance. But this felt different. Targeted, Alex glanced around the quiet house, suddenly feeling exposed. The normally comforting sunlight through the window now seemed harsh and unforgiving. What had he done to deserve this? As the hours passed, doubt and anxiety gnawed at him. Could neighbors be watching? Was this a message, silent but threatening, to keep him in line? Alex's curiosity battled with a rising sense of dread. The letter was more than a fine. It was a challenge. That evening at the local grocery store, whispers floated on the air. A few neighbors exchanged quick glances when Alex entered the store, their eyes flickering with a mix of sympathy and wariness. Word had spread fast. The HOA president's crackdown was no secret. Alex caught snippets of conversation. He's gone too far this time. I heard he fines anyone who questions him. Better pay up or you'll be next. A shiver ran down Alex's spine. What kind of man ran their community like a tyrant? Back home, he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letter. His phone buzzed with a message from a neighbor. If you want, we can meet tomorrow. This isn't right. It was a lifeline, but Alex hesitated. Standing up to the HOA felt risky, especially against someone like Richard. The clock ticked relentlessly. 14 days until the deadline. Alex knew what he needed to do. Respond. But how? That night, sleep eluded him. His mind churned with questions. Was this a mistake or a trap? And if he paid, would the nightmare end or only grow worse? The letter sat on the table the next morning, a symbol of unseen battles about to erupt. Little did Alex know, this $2,100 fine would ignite a chain of events that would shake Oak Ridge Estates to its core and push the HOA president to the brink of losing control. The community center was unusually crowded that evening, the hum of hushed conversations filling the room. Oak Ridge Estates' monthly HOA meeting was always a formality. A few polite nods, some brief updates, and then everyone went home. But tonight felt different. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Alex entered cautiously, clutching, the ominous letter in his hand. He scanned the room and spotted familiar faces, neighbors who exchanged furtive glances, whispering in low tones. Some avoided eye contact altogether. Everyone seemed on edge, as if bracing for a storm. At the head of the room stood Richard, the HOA president. His presence was commanding, his posture rigid, eyes sharp and cold. He wore his usual tailored suit, But tonight, there was an unmistakable edge to his demeanor, like a caged animal pacing behind a pristine mask. As the meeting began, Richard wasted no time asserting control. "I expect full compliance from every homeowner," he declared, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable menace. "Our rules exist to maintain the value and integrity of this neighborhood. Violations will not be tolerated." His gaze swept the room, landing briefly on Alex. The silent recognition was unmistakable. This was personal. Richard's words cut through the murmurs like a blade. He spoke of fines and penalties with cold precision, detailing recent violations and warning that anyone questioning his authority would face consequences. The message was clear: dissent was not welcome. Alex felt a growing knot in his stomach. Neighbors sat stiffly, eyes downcast, unwilling to challenge Richard openly. But Alex sensed something simmering beneath the surface, a fragile fear that threatened to boil over. Then came the moment Alex dreaded most. Richard's voice lowered, sharp with accusation. "And then there's the matter of Mr. Stevens," Alex's full name, used deliberately, "who has been assessed a $2,100 fine for unauthorized exterior changes." The room grew deathly silent. All eyes turned to Alex, who suddenly felt the weight of 100 gazes burning into his skin. "Mr. Stevens," Richard continued, "has ignored multiple warnings and failed to respond. This behavior undermines the very fabric of our community." Alex's heart pounded. Was this a trial by fire? The president's words were carefully crafted to isolate him, to paint him as the villain. But something inside Alex stirred, a flicker of defiance amid the dread. He could feel the silent judgment of neighbors, the way some avoided his eyes, the way others barely concealed curiosity. When Richard finished, the meeting opened for comments. A few neighbors hesitated, their voices small and cautious. "Perhaps we should give Mr. Stevens a chance to explain," one murmured. Another shook their head, whispering about fairness and transparency. But Richard swiftly cut them down. "The rules are clear," he snapped. "No one is above them." Alex swallowed hard, realizing the depth of the battle ahead. This wasn't just about a fine. It was about power, control, and a fight for dignity. After the meeting, whispers followed Alex out the door. Some neighbors approached quietly, offering support. Others crossed the street to avoid him altogether. The community was divided, and Alex stood at the center of a storm he hadn't asked for. As he walked to his car, he glanced back at the community center, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. The president's iron grip was tightening, and Alex knew that any misstep could unleash consequences far worse than a fine. The chilling thought settled in. This was just the beginning. Back in his quiet living room, Alex sat alone, the weight of the $2,100 fine pressing heavily on his mind. The letter, the meeting, the president's icy glare, all replayed in his thoughts like a relentless loop. But beneath the frustration and fear, a spark of resolve began to flicker. He wasn't going to let Richard's heavy-handed tactics crush him, or the neighborhood's sense of fairness. For days, Alex wrestled with his options. Paying the fine with a check or credit card felt like surrender. It would be tacit approval of Richard's authority, a silent nod to the oppressive rules. But refusing to pay risked legal action, liens on his home, and even eviction. The stakes were high. Then, one evening, as he watched the small pile of coins in his jar clinking softly, a bold idea took shape, one fueled by both defiance and a touch of mischief. What if he paid the fine entirely in coins? The thought was ridiculous and audacious. Could the HOA even accept such a payment? Would the president explode with rage? And what would the neighbors think? Alex smiled to himself. It was the perfect way to challenge the system without breaking the rules. If the fine was valid, he would pay it, in the only way that would make Richard lose his composure. Over the next few days, Alex began gathering every coin he could find. Dimes, quarters, nickels, pennies. He emptied every jar, every pocket, every forgotten corner of his house. He asked friends and family for spare change. Even the kids down the street got involved, contributing their allowance. The pile grew, larger than Alex expected. He filled bags and boxes with a dizzying amount of coins. Counting it all took hours, and his fingers ached from the constant clinking and sorting. But every coin was a statement, a small rebellion that added up to something much bigger. As the deadline for the fine approached, Alex felt a mixture of excitement and dread. The neighborhood buzzed with quiet speculation. Had he gone mad? Was this a stunt or a serious protest? Some admired his courage, others worried about the fallout. The night before delivering the payment, Alex barely slept. He pictured the scene at the HOA office. The cashier's frustration, the president's fury, the whispered conversations among neighbors. He imagined the ripple effects, the cracks appearing in the president's iron grip. But beneath it all was a deeper question. Would this act of defiance spark change, or simply make things worse? On the morning of the delivery, Alex loaded the bags of coins into his car. The sound of metal clinking against metal echoed through the garage like a battle drum. He steeled himself for what lay ahead. Driving to the community center, he noticed the curious stares of neighbors. Rumors had clearly spread. Some gave nods of encouragement. Others avoided eye contact, wary of the conflict. Pulling up to the HOA office, Alex took a deep breath and stepped inside. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw the bags. "You want to pay with coins?" she asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and amusement. "Yes," Alex replied firmly. "It's the fine I owe." Word must have traveled fast because within minutes, Richard appeared, his expression a volatile mix of shock and barely concealed rage. Alex could feel the tension crackling in the air like static electricity. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either break the president's control or ignite a firestorm. The moment Alex stepped into the HOA office, the atmosphere shifted like a thunderstorm rolling in. The receptionist's initial surprise quickly gave way to a cautious, almost nervous energy. Word must have spread fast. This was no ordinary payment. Alex set the bags of coins on the counter with a heavy clink that echoed through the quiet room. The cashier's eyes widened, and she exchanged a glance with Richard, who had just entered behind Alex, his face ashen but eyes burning with fury. "You're serious?" the cashier asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex met Richard's icy stare and nodded calmly. "I'm paying the fine, in full, with coins." The room seemed to hold its breath. Richard's jaw tightened, muscles twitching with barely suppressed rage. "This is absurd," he hissed, voice low but dangerous. "You're making a mockery of the HOA." Alex remained steady. "I'm using the means available to me. It's within the rules. If the HOA wants compliance, it must accept payment." The cashier began unloading the first bag of coins onto the counter. The clatter of quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies filled the small office, bouncing off the walls like a relentless drumbeat. Counting began, slow and painstaking, the cashier's brow furrowed in concentration. Richard's eyes darted to the door as more neighbors trickled in, drawn by the noise and whispers. One by one, they peered inside, faces a mix of disbelief and curiosity. Some smirked, others exchanged silent nods of approval. The quiet, controlled world of Oak Ridge Estates was beginning to crack. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The pile of coins grew and grew on the counter, silver and copper waves rising with every bag emptied. The cashier's hands moved tirelessly, counting and recounting, logging every cent. Alex watched Richard's composure unravel with each clink. Suddenly, Richard slammed his fist on the counter, making the coins jump. Enough, he barked. This farce needs to end. But the cashier held up a hand. Sir, we have to count it all. We can't just accept partial payment. Richard's face twisted, veins throbbing at his temple. This isn't just about counting coins. It's about respect, order, and authority. What message does this send to the community? Alex leaned forward, voice steady but firm. It sends a message that power can be challenged, that fairness matters more than fear. A murmur rippled through the small crowd gathered by the doorway. The president's control was slipping right before their eyes. Richard's breath came. Fast now. His polished facade cracked as he paced behind the counter, fists clenched. His voice dropped into a dangerous growl. You think this is clever? A joke? You're the problem, not me. Alex met his glare head on. No, the problem is the way you wield your power. This payment is proof. Then, with a sudden, almost violent movement, Richard turned and stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him. Silence fell, broken only by the relentless clinking of coins as the cashier resumed her counting. Neighbors exchanged glances, the tension thick but charged with something new. Hope. Alex stood tall, watching the slow, steady tally. The coins piled higher than anyone had imagined, a physical symbol of resistance against a leader who'd lost his way. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across Oak Ridge Estates. The once unshakable order was fractured, and the community held its breath, waiting to see what would come next. The sun had barely set when Richard burst back into the HOA office, his face flushed with rage and disbelief. The calm facade he had so carefully maintained was shattered, replaced by a tempest of fury that electrified the room. I've had enough of this circus, he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. The neighbors gathered in the small office flinched, exchanging uneasy glances. This was a side of Richard no one had seen before. A man unraveling before their eyes, Alex, stood firm, unflinching as Richard's gaze bore down on him like a storm. You think paying in coins embarrasses me? Richard spat. It embarrasses you more. You're making a mockery of our community and our rules. A sharp laugh escaped Alex's lips. Maybe it's your leadership that's the real joke. Richard's eyes flashed dangerously. You don't get to talk to me like that. His voice dropped, low and threatening. I've built this neighborhood into something respectable. I keep order. Without me, it falls apart. The room seemed to close in, the tension palpable. The neighbors watching felt like silent witnesses to a breaking point. Order? Alex challenged. Or control? You've turned this HOA into a dictatorship. You wield fines and rules like weapons, not tools for community. Richard's breath came heavy and fast, his composure slipping further with each word. His hands trembled, fists clenching and unclenching. You think you're a hero? You're just a troublemaker stirring dissent. Behind him, the receptionist nervously shuffled papers trying to diffuse the charged atmosphere, but Richard wasn't done. I won't let you undermine everything I've worked for, he growled. You'll pay the price. Suddenly, he slammed his fist on the desk, sending a stack of papers flying. The sharp noise startled everyone, including Richard himself. For a moment, he looked stunned, the magnitude of his outburst dawning on him. Alex's eyes narrowed. Maybe it's you who should pay the price for abusing your power. The neighbors, who had been silent until now, began to murmur. Some nodded, others exchanged approving looks. The tide was shifting. Richard's fury reached a boiling point. His voice rose, cracking under the strain. You want to fight? You'll get one. I'll use every rule, every bylaw, every ounce of authority to crush you. Alex's jaw tightened. And I'll fight every step of the way. The room held its breath, the standoff thick with tension. Then, as suddenly as it began, Richard stormed out, slamming the door behind him with a final, echoing bang. A stunned silence followed. Alex glanced around at the neighbors, seeing a mixture of shock, admiration, and a flicker of hope. The president's outburst had exposed cracks in the armor, revealing vulnerabilities beneath the iron control. Outside, the evening air was cool and crisp. The community, once held tightly under Richard's grip, seemed to breathe a little easier. But the battle was far from over. Alex knew the president's meltdown was just the beginning of a larger struggle for fairness and respect. A fight that would test the limits of their small neighborhood and the resilience of its people. The morning after Richard's explosive meltdown, Oak Ridge Estates felt different. The air carried a subtle but unmistakable shift, a quiet pulse of unrest that rippled through the manicured lawns and pristine sidewalks. Beneath the surface of polite greetings and courteous nods, something new was awakening. Alex walked his dog through the neighborhood, noting small but telling signs of change. A few neighbors had planted colorful flowers where dull grass had once dominated. Others had placed tasteful but defiant "Fairness Matters" signs in their yards, subtle but pointed. Whispers of the coin payment had spread like wildfire, and the story of Richard's meltdown was now common knowledge. While many residents remained cautious, a growing number felt emboldened, silent allies in a brewing rebellion. At the weekly community coffee gathering, hushed conversations filled the local cafe. "Did you hear what Alex did?" one neighbor asked, voice low but tinged with admiration. "Richard looked like he was about to explode." Another replied, "Finally, someone stood up to him. We can't keep living in fear." But not everyone was ready to confront the president directly. Many still feared repercussions, steep fines, legal threats, or social ostracism. The community was fractured between those craving change and those clinging to the fragile status quo. Inside his home, Alex mapped out a plan. The coin payment had been just the beginning. Now, it was time to rally the neighborhood without provoking outright conflict. A silent rebellion, small acts of defiance that chipped away at Richard's grip, slowly and strategically. He drafted a newsletter, carefully worded and signed anonymously, calling for transparency, fairness, and a more inclusive approach to community governance. It encouraged neighbors to attend the next HOA meeting and demand accountability. Alex distributed the newsletter in secret, slipping copies under doors and into mailboxes under cover of night. The response was cautious but positive. Messages of support arrived. Anonymous notes of encouragement appeared on his doorstep. Meanwhile, Richard retreated into his office fortress, his paranoia deepening. He tightened regulations further, sent more threatening letters, and tried desperately to regain control. But the more he pushed, the more resistance grew. At the next HOA meeting, the atmosphere was charged. More residents showed up, their faces determined. Quiet questions and polite challenges began to surface. Richard, though still defiant, was visibly rattled. Alex watched from the back, heart pounding. The silent rebellion was gaining momentum. The neighborhood, once silenced by fear, was finding its voice. But Richard was not ready to surrender. His eyes locked onto Alex across the room, a storm brewing behind them. The battle lines were drawn, and the struggle for Oak Ridge Estate's soul was far from over. As the meeting adjourned, neighbors lingered, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. The seeds of change had been planted, but the harvest was uncertain. Outside, the sun set slowly, casting long shadows over the streets. Oak Ridge Estates was no longer the same. Beneath its calm surface, a silent rebellion had begun. Quiet, relentless, and unstoppable. The days following the packed HOA meeting felt like the calm before a storm. Oak Ridge Estates was a neighborhood transformed, not by violence or loud protests, but by quiet determination and the forging of new alliances. Alex found himself at the center of it all, both a reluctant leader and a beacon of hope. He held small gatherings in his home, neighbors who'd never spoken before now sitting around his kitchen table, sharing stories of frustration, hopes for change, and strategies for the battles ahead. Among them was Maria, a sharp-witted mother, of two whose complaints about Richard's arbitrary fines had been dismissed for years. "We've been too quiet for too long," she said one evening, her eyes blazing with conviction. "It's time to stand together." James, an elderly retiree who'd seen the community through decades of change, nodded slowly. "Power like—" "Richards thrives on isolation," he said. "If we unite, he can't control us so easily." The group grew cautiously optimistic, plotting ways to keep pressure on Richard without provoking outright war. They discussed attending every meeting en masse, proposing amendments to the HOA bylaws, and demanding transparency in spending and enforcement. Meanwhile, Richard's paranoia deepened. His messages grew sharper, his tone colder. The once polished president now seemed desperate, lashing out in increasingly petty ways. Notices went out accusing various homeowners of minor infractions, flags not perfectly aligned, flower beds slightly overgrown, clear attempts to sow fear and division, yet every attempt backfired. Instead of retreating, the community banded closer. When the fines came, neighbors pooled money to help those threatened with eviction. Quiet acts of kindness bloomed amid the conflict. One evening, as Alex walked home from a meeting, he noticed a flyer taped to his front door. "Join the resistance. Stand for fairness. Oak Ridge United." It was unsigned, but the message was clear. The rebellion had taken on a life of its own. At the next HOA meeting, the room was electric with anticipation. Richard arrived looking exhausted but defiant, determined to reassert control. But the crowd had changed, where once they'd been. Subdued. Now they were vocal, united. Maria stood up, speaking clearly and firmly. "We demand transparency. We want clear records of fines and spending and fair enforcement of rules. This neighborhood belongs to all of us." James followed, adding, "We propose a committee to oversee decisions, to ensure no one person wields unchecked power." Richard's face tightened, but he struggled to suppress the frustration boiling beneath the surface. For the first time, he faced not just resistance, but organized opposition. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement, with more neighbors standing up to voice their support. Alex watched, heart pounding. The tides had turned. The iron grip was weakening, but the fight was far from over. As the meeting ended, Richard's icy glare met Alex's. It was a silent warning. He wouldn't go down without a fight. Outside, the sun dipped behind the trees, casting the neighborhood in a fiery glow. The battle for Oak Ridge Estates was intensifying, alliances were solidifying, and every moment brimmed with suspense. The night of the decisive HOA meeting arrived with a tense, electric energy that pulsed through Oak Ridge Estates. The community center was packed, every chair filled, every corner standing room only. Neighbors who had once whispered now spoke openly, united by a common cause, reclaiming their neighborhood from the grip of a president who had lost his way. Alex felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders as he took his place near the front, surrounded by allies like Maria and James. The air was thick with anticipation and apprehension. Richard had promised a final show of force, a last attempt to assert control. When Richard entered, the room fell silent. His expression was unreadable, a mix of exhaustion and steely resolve. He cleared his throat and launched into a speech about order, tradition, and the need for strong leadership. But the words fell flat, drowned by the murmurs and exchanged glances of a community no longer willing to be silenced. Then Maria stood, her voice calm but firm. "This community deserves respect, transparency, and fairness. We're here to demand that the bylaws be rewritten, that fines be issued justly, and that decisions be made collectively." One by one, neighbors rose to speak, recounting stories, of unfair treatment, arbitrary fines, and the fear that had ruled their lives. The room transformed from a battlefield into a forum for healing, truth, and hope. Richard's face darkened. For a moment, it seemed he might explode again, but then something unexpected happened. He cleared his throat, and his voice softened. "Maybe I've been too harsh," he admitted quietly. "I wanted to keep this neighborhood perfect, but I lost sight of the people who live here. I'm sorry." A stunned silence followed. Alex exchanged surprised glances with Maria and James. Could this be the moment the fight ended? But then, Richard reached into his pocket and pulled out a small stack of papers. Minutes from past meetings, records no one had seen before. "Here," he said, "are the true records of the HOA. I've been keeping things from all of you to protect this community from chaos." The room leaned in, curiosity peaked. As the papers circulated, murmurs turned to gasps. The records revealed secret agreements, hidden expenditures, and even evidence that some fines had been levied to cover personal debts. A shocking betrayal. Richard's admission suddenly took on a darker meaning. His apology felt hollow against the weight of the uncovered corruption. Alex stood. "This isn't about one man's power, it's about restoring trust. We need new leadership, transparent, accountable, and fair." The crowd erupted in applause. The meeting ended with a vote. Overwhelming support for dissolving the current board and electing a new committee with checks and balances to ensure fairness. Days later, as the neighborhood healed and rebuilt, Richard quietly resigned and moved away, leaving behind a legacy fractured by his own mistakes. Alex looked out over the community he loved, a place scarred but stronger. The coin payment, the rebellion, and the struggle had sparked something bigger than anyone imagined, a movement toward justice, unity, and respect. But as he stood on his porch one evening, Alex found a single coin glinting in the grass, an unmarked penny, worn and weathered. He picked it up, a small smile playing on his lips. The fight had ended, but the story of Oak Ridge Estates was far from over.